Hey, tonight looks like a great night for fractions, decimals, and percents. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to learn tonight is how to change a decimal to a percent and how to go backwards too, percents to a decimal. Decimals to percents is quite simple when you realize what a percent is. Percent means out of 100. So if I take this word and I break it down, it literally means out of 100. So if I have a decimal that's 0.25 and I need to make it out of 100, what I really want to do is, the shortcut is to just take the decimal out, and I'm going to go 2 spaces because 100 has 2 zeros. So when I'm multiplying by 100, I am moving to the right 2 spaces, and then 0.25 becomes 25%. Also, another way to look at it is I don't want to be a decimal anymore, I want to be a percent. So I'm going to move my decimal towards a percent sign. On the second one down here, so now I want to be a percent, so I'm going to move my decimal. Now, I'm still going to move it 2 times no matter what because I have those 2 zeros in 100. So what do? Well, I can't have an empty cradle, so I'm going to annex a 0, and now I have 40%. Okay, so going backwards, I said we're going to go both ways. So to go from 73% to a decimal, we're going to do the same thing we just did, only in reverse. So I don't want to be a percent anymore, so I'm going to move away from the percent sign. My decimal, of course, in a whole number is always at the end, so I'm going to move it 1, 2 away. So my final answer for this one is 0.73 or 73 hundredths. Again, thinking that percent out of 100, that makes sense that we would say this is 73 hundredths. Same thing with 97%. There's my decimal. I'm going to move it 2 places to the left, drop the percent sign, and add my 0 on front, and there is my 0.97. All right, this one is your turn. Turn these decimals to percents and percents to decimals. The next transition we're going to make is decimals to fractions, and then of course reverse fractions to decimals. All right, as we go decimals to fractions and back, the first thing is if we understand, especially decimals, what the place value is. So when I look at that first one there, I see 3/10. Now, in our place value, after our decimal, everything is done in multiples of tens. We have tenths, then we have hundredths, then we have thousandths. And one thing to realize with this is, how many zeros does a 10 have? Well, it has 1, so that's 1 place past the decimal. How many zeros does 100 have? Well, it has 2, so that's 2 places past the decimal. So if we can start thinking of it that way, even if we don't know, we can simply look at this and say, okay, so I have a 3, my 3 is going to go on top, and then how many places past the decimal am I? Well, I'm only 1 place, so that means I'm going to have 1 0, and it's a multiple of 10, so this is 3/10. Now it said 3/10, not 0.3. If we say it properly, we would say it is 3/10. So when we're putting these decimals to fractions, it's pretty simple if we know our place values. Same thing with the next one. I can take 45, and it's 2 places past the decimal, and then I'm going to add a 1 in front, so I have 45 hundredths. Now 45 hundredths can be simplified down to 9/20, and we always simplify if we can, okay? But again, being able to turn that from a decimal of 0.45 to putting it again, and you don't need to know your place value. You simply need to know how many places past the decimal, put that many zeros, and add a 1 up front. Okay, when we go the opposite way though, so changing a fraction to a decimal, this is going to take some division. So we take and we have 1/3. But when we do this, we call it top dog in the house. So that first number is going to go under our bracket, and 3 is going to go out. Now this is going to go back to our decimal dividing. So 3 doesn't go into 1, so we put our 0 and annex a 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. I get 9. I'm left with 1. I can annex as many zeros I want after that decimal. And if you notice, it just keeps going. We call this a repeating decimal. So what we're going to do is take that 0.33, and I'm going to put a line above the 3, and that just tells me that that 3 is going to repeat forever, and that's called bar notation. Then the last part of this is, so now we have 6/8. Now, if you look at 6/8 and you realize, hey, I can simplify 6/8 into 3/4, that would be a benchmark fraction that I hope you know what is a decimal. But if you don't, we're going to come over here and we're going to do 3 divided by 4. Again, remember, top dog in the house, top number always goes under the bracket. So 4 goes into 3, well, it doesn't. Then 4 goes into 30 7 times. Annex another 0 and bring it on down. 4 goes into 20 5 times, and then that's going to zero us out. So the answer to this one is just 0.75. So again, when we do fractions to decimals, we need to divide. So 1 divided by 3, and we've talked many times about how fractions are actually division problems. So now we're really using them as division problems. All right, this one is your turn. So decimals to fractions and back. The last thing we need to go over is fractions to percents. So we've got one more, hang in there. So when we have a fraction to a percent, the first thing we need to do, if we don't know it, like 1/2 is a benchmark fraction, and hopefully you know what that is. But if I don't know it, the first thing I need to do is actually turn that fraction into a decimal. So again, with that 1 divided by 2, so 2 doesn't go into 1. 2 goes into 10 5 times, and that's it. So now I have a fraction of 0.5. If we go back to the very first slide, it talks about how we've changed fractions into decimals into percents by simply moving the decimal toward the percent sign and annexing a 0. So when we are all done, 50% is my percent from my fraction. So let's look at 2/3. Now this one's a unique one, and I put this in here on purpose because, again, if you don't know what 2/3 is as a decimal, we're going to go ahead and divide it. 3 goes into 2, well, it doesn't. Annex that 0. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 3 goes into 20 6 times, and as you see, we start getting this repeating pattern again like we had before. So that means that when I do my decimal, so I could keep going, I could keep going on forever and ever on this with 6s. But what that translates to as a decimal is we're going to do like we did before and just put that line over the 6. Same thing, we're going to move that decimal 2 places, but when I write my percent, I'm going to leave that line over it, okay, just to show that that kept being repeated. All right, let's look at the 45%. So these ones are actually a little bit easier to go because, again, we undo the percent by moving the decimal 2 places to the left. So then my decimal is 0.45. and I need to turn it into a fraction, which becomes 45/100ths, and that should look familiar because we did it before. So 45/100ths simplified is 9/20ths. So going the opposite way is actually a little bit easier because it's easier to go from a decimal to a fraction than it is to go the other way. So on this one again, we're going to move that decimal 2 jumps away from the percent, so I end up with 0.21, and then I'm going to turn that into a fraction, 21/100. Now, think again what we said about percent. Percent is out of 100. Technically, I can skip this step because every percent is out of 100. So I can simply say, well, if 45% means 45 out of 100, then I can just start right here. And 21% means 21 out of 100, so I could start right there with my fraction and then simplify if I need to. All right, it is your turn. Do these 4 final questions. Good luck and have a great afternoon.